I signed the final document before my son even realized what it meant, and that was the moment I knew I would never be powerless again. The lawyer slid the paper toward me with a careful, almost sympathetic look, but I didn't return it. My hand was steady as I picked up the pen, far steadier than it had been just a week ago when I could barely hold a cup of tea without trembling. Funny how clarity can strengthen you faster than any medication. They thought I was fragile. They thought I was confused. They thought they had time. I let the ink dry before I looked up, offering nothing but a small, polite smile. "Is there anything else, Mrs. Collins?" the lawyer asked. I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I believe everything is exactly where it needs to be now." And for the first time in a long time, that was the truth. But 3 days earlier, I had believed something entirely different. 3 days earlier, I still believed I was going home to my family. The hospital discharged me just after 10 a.m. The nurse helped me into my coat, her hands gentle, her voice warm in a way that made me feel safe. "Do you have someone picking you up?" she asked. "My son," I said, with a smile that came easily then. "He and his wife." I remember how proud I felt saying that. How certain I was that I had done something right in this life. Daniel arrived 10 minutes later, his car idling at the curb. He stepped out, gave me a quick hug, careful not to press too hard against my ribs. "You look good, Mom," he said, though he didn't quite meet my eyes. I told myself he was tired. Life is busy when you're in your 40s. Responsibilities, work, marriage. I understood all of that. Jessica sat in the passenger seat, turning halfway around to smile at me as I settled into the back. "We're so glad you're home," she said, her voice soft, perfectly measured. "We've been getting everything ready for you." I thanked her. Of course I did. That's what you do when someone offers kindness, even if something about it feels rehearsed. The drive home was quiet, not uncomfortable, just careful, like we were all choosing our words before speaking them, even though no one was saying much at all. I watched the familiar streets pass by, the same grocery store on Maple Avenue, the same gas station on the corner where Daniel used to beg for candy bars when he was 10. Everything looked the same. I expected to feel relief. Instead, there was a strange tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with my condition. When we pulled into the driveway, Jessica turned to me again. "Why don't you go inside and rest?" she said. "I'll grab your things." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, Mom. Take it easy." I didn't argue. I was tired after all. Recovery takes time. That's what everyone kept telling me. I stepped out of the car slowly, feeling the cool air against my face, and walked up the front steps of the house I had lived in for over 30 years. My home. The door wasn't locked. It never used to be. I pushed it open and stepped inside, the scent of lemon cleaner lingering faintly in the air. Everything looked neat, almost too neat. I set my purse down on the small table by the door and took a few careful steps into the living room. And that's when I heard it. Jessica's voice. Low, controlled, coming from the kitchen. "We can't wait too long, Daniel. The longer she stays here, the harder it'll be." I stopped. Not because I wanted to listen, but because my body refused to move. Daniel's voice came next, quieter. "I know. I don't want to rush it." There was a pause. Then Jessica again, sharper this time though still hushed. "This isn't rushing. This is planning. The facility has an opening next month. If we don't take it, we'll lose the spot." Facility. The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar, yet somehow immediately understood. My hand tightened around the edge of the doorway. Daniel sighed. "She just got out of the hospital." "Exactly," Jessica replied. "She's vulnerable right now. This is the perfect time to transition her somewhere she'll be taken care of properly." Properly. I had taken care of that house, of that family, of him, for decades. I didn't step forward. I didn't make a sound. I just stood there, invisible in my own home, listening to my future being arranged like a piece of furniture that no longer fit. And in that moment something inside me didn't break. It shifted. I did not walk into that kitchen. I did not clear my throat or let the floor creak beneath my feet to announce my presence. Instead, I stepped back slowly, quietly, as if I had just opened a door to something I was never meant to see, and I let it close without a sound. My heart was beating fast, but not in panic. It was something colder than that, something sharper. I moved into the living room and lowered myself onto the couch, careful, controlled, as though nothing had changed. As though I had not just heard my future being negotiated in hushed voices behind a wall I had painted myself 15 years ago. I placed my hands in my lap and looked around the room. The same curtains. The same photographs. Daniel at 8 years old holding a fishing rod twice his size, smiling like he had just discovered the world. Me standing behind him, my hand on his shoulder, proud in a way that feels almost foolish now. I did not cry. Not then. That would have made it real too quickly. Instead, I listened. Footsteps. A cabinet closing. Jessica's voice again, lighter now, rehearsed. When she entered the living room, she was smiling. "Margaret, you should be resting," she said, walking toward me with that same careful warmth she had used all morning. "Let me get you some tea." I looked up at her and returned the smile, matching her tone, matching her pace. "That would be lovely," I said. My voice did not shake. That seemed to surprise her just for a second. Daniel followed a moment later, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "You doing okay, Mom?" he asked. I nodded. "I am home," I said. "That is enough for now." He nodded back, relieved, as if I had passed some kind of test without realizing it. Jessica disappeared into the kitchen again, and I could hear the kettle being filled, the soft click of the stove. Ordinary sounds. Familiar sounds. Sounds that had once meant comfort. Now they felt staged, like background noise in a scene that had already been decided. I leaned back slightly against the couch and let my eyes drift to the hallway. My bedroom was at the end, just past the framed photo of my late husband that still hung slightly crooked because Daniel had promised to fix it and never did. I noticed things I had ignored before. The absence of my slippers by the door. The way the hallway table had been cleared of the small bowl where I used to leave my keys. Subtle changes. Quiet erasures. Jessica returned with the tea, placing the cup gently into my hands. "Careful, it is hot," she said. I thanked her again, watching her face as I took a small sip. She held my gaze a fraction longer than necessary, as if searching for something. Weakness, perhaps. Confusion. Permission. I gave her none of it. "You have done a lot around here," I said calmly, glancing toward the spotless kitchen. "It looks different." She smiled, pleased. "I just wanted everything to be easier for you." Easier. I let the word settle between us. Daniel shifted his weight slightly, then sat down across from me. "We have been talking," he began, his voice careful, the same tone he used when he was a boy trying to explain a broken window. I turned my head toward him, giving him my full attention. "About what?" I asked. He hesitated. "Just long enough." Jessica stepped in smoothly. "About making sure you have the best care possible while you recover," she said, her hand resting lightly on the back of his chair, guiding him without touching him directly. I nodded slowly, as if considering something reasonable. "Of course," I said. "That is very thoughtful." And for the first time since I stepped through that front door, I saw it clearly. The relief in their eyes. The quiet confidence. They thought I did not know. They thought they were leading this conversation. They thought I would follow wherever they pointed. I took another sip of tea, steady, unhurried, and set the cup down carefully on the table beside me. Then I looked at both of them, not as a mother who had just come home, but as someone who had finally begun to understand the room she was sitting in. And I smiled just enough to let them believe they were still in control. That evening, I sat at the dining table and watched them perform kindness like it was part of a routine they had practiced without me. Jessica insisted on cooking dinner, something she had never done before unless guests were coming over. The smell of roasted chicken filled the house, mixed with herbs I did not recognize, and for a moment, it almost felt like a normal night. Almost. Daniel set the table, placing the utensils carefully, avoiding looking directly at me unless necessary. "You should not be doing too much, Mom," he said when I stood up to help. "Doctor's orders." I nodded and sat back down. I did not argue. I did not remind him that I had cooked for him every night for 20 years without asking for permission. I simply folded my hands in my lap and observed. That was my role now. Not mother. Not authority. Observer. When we sat down to eat, Jessica smiled across the table at me, her eyes bright, her tone light. "I made your favorite," she said. I looked at the plate. It was not my favorite. It was close but not quite right. The seasoning was different. The vegetables were cut smaller than I liked. Small details. Easy to miss if you were not paying attention. But I was paying attention now. It looks wonderful, I said. And I meant it in the way one means something that is technically true but not entirely honest. Daniel cleared his throat halfway through the meal. We were thinking, he began again, his voice cautious like he was stepping onto thin ice. I did not look up immediately. I let him sit with the silence for a second longer than he expected. Then I lifted my eyes to his. Yes. He hesitated. Jessica placed her fork down gently and took over, just as she had earlier. We just want to make sure you have the right support during your recovery, she said. You have been through a lot, and we both work full-time. It might be difficult for you here on your own during the day. On your own. I repeated the phrase silently, as if I had not spent most of my life managing this house alone while raising a child and supporting a husband. As if independence had suddenly become a flaw instead of a strength. I understand, I said calmly. Recovery does take time. Jessica smiled, encouraged. Exactly. And there are places that specialize in that kind of care. Beautiful places. Comfortable. With staff available 24 hours a day. Facilities. She did not say the word this time, but it lingered. Just beneath her sentence. Daniel nodded, still not fully meeting my gaze. Just temporary, he added quickly. Until you are back on your feet. I set my fork down carefully and reached for my glass of water, taking a slow sip. I could feel both of them watching me, waiting for a reaction. Fear. Resistance. Gratitude. Anything they could shape. I gave them none of it. That sounds like something worth considering, I said. And there it was again. That flicker of relief. That quiet confirmation passing between them in a glance they thought I did not see. They believed the decision was already made. They believed I would follow the path they were laying out, step by step, question by question, until I arrived exactly where they wanted me to be. I finished my meal slowly, deliberately, letting the conversation drift to safer topics. Weather, work, a neighbor's new fence, normal things, hollow things. After dinner, Daniel stood up quickly. I will take care of the dishes, he said, almost too eager. Jessica followed him into the kitchen, their voices dropping again into that careful, private tone. I remained at the table for a moment longer, staring at the empty plate in front of me. Then I stood up and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. The door was slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. The room looked familiar, but something felt off. My dresser was cleaner than I remembered. Too clean. I opened the top drawer. My jewelry box was gone. Not misplaced. Gone. I moved to the closet. A few of my coats were missing. Not all. Just enough to be noticeable if you were paying attention. Which until now I had not been. I closed the closet door slowly and stood there in the quiet of the room that had once been mine without question. They were not planning. They were preparing. And the difference between those two things is something you only understand when it is happening to you. I sat down on the edge of the bed, placing my hands flat against the comforter, grounding myself in something that still felt real. They thought I was recovering. They thought I was unaware. They thought they were ahead. I let out a slow breath and allowed a small, almost invisible smile to form. They were wrong. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual, not because I had slept well, but because my mind refused to rest in a house that no longer felt entirely mine. The clock on the nightstand read 5:42 a.m., the same clock my husband had insisted on buying 20 years ago because he liked the soft ticking sound. It was still there, steady, reliable, unchanged. I sat up slowly, letting the quiet settle around me. For a moment I listened. No voices. No footsteps. Just silence. The kind of silence that used to feel peaceful. Now it felt like a pause before something inevitable. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to see the driveway. Daniel's car was gone. He had already left for work. Jessica's car was still there. That meant she was home. That meant I needed to be careful. I moved through the house at a slower pace than usual, not because I had to, but because it gave me time to think, to observe, to notice what I had ignored before. The kitchen was spotless again. No dishes left out. No sign of last night's dinner. Everything erased as if it had never happened. I opened the cabinet where I used to keep my medications. They were there but rearranged, organized into a plastic container labeled with days of the week in bold black letters. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I did not remember buying that container. I did not remember asking for help organizing my own routine. I closed the cabinet quietly. Control. That was what this was about. Not care. Not concern. Control disguised as assistance. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned lightly against the counter, letting my eyes scan the room. On the far edge of the kitchen table, partially tucked beneath a stack of neatly folded mail, was something that did not belong there. A brochure. Glossy. Clean. Intentional. I walked over and picked it up, my fingers steady despite the weight I already knew it carried. Silver Pine Senior Living. The front read in soft blue letters above a picture of smiling people sitting in a garden that looked too perfect to be real. I opened it slowly. Spacious rooms. Personalized care plans. 24-hour assistance. Transportation services. Community activities. Words designed to soften something that could not be softened. I turned the page. There it was. A form. Printed. Filled out. Name Margaret Collins. Age 68. Emergency contact. Daniel Collins. Preferred move-in date blank. Not yet. Not decided. Waiting. Waiting for the right moment. I closed the brochure and placed it back exactly where I found it, aligning it carefully with the edge of the table as if I had never touched it. Then I sat down in the chair across from it and folded my hands. They were not rushing. They were preparing every step, every detail, every document. And they believed they had time. I heard movement upstairs. A door opening. Footsteps. Light measured. Jessica. I did not look up immediately when she entered the kitchen. I let her see me sitting there, calm, composed, exactly where she expected me to be. You are up early, she said, her voice carrying that same controlled warmth. I nodded slightly. Old habits, I replied. She walked over to the coffee machine, pressing the button, the sound filling the space between us. You should be resting, she added. I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes. Resting does not mean not thinking, I said quietly. She paused for half a second, just enough to notice. Then she smiled again, brushing it off. Of course, she said. I just want you to feel comfortable. Comfortable. Another careful word. Another soft layer over something harder underneath. I watched her pour the coffee, her movements precise, practiced. She believed she was managing the situation, guiding it, controlling it. I let her believe that. For now. Because the truth was simple. They had made a plan. They had prepared every detail. They had already decided where I belonged. And now, sitting there in that quiet kitchen, I made a decision of my own. I would not confront them. Not yet. I would not argue. I would not resist in the way they expected. I would do something far more effective. I would listen. I would watch. And when the time came, I would make sure that the next move was mine. By the third day, I understood their rhythm. It was subtle, almost invisible if you were not paying attention, but once you saw it, you could not unsee it. Jessica controlled the environment. Daniel followed her lead. Every conversation was guided, every decision softened before it was presented, every step carefully placed so that I would feel like I was choosing something that had already been chosen for me. That morning, I stayed in my room longer than usual, not out of weakness but out of strategy. I wanted to see how they behaved when they thought I was not watching. The house had a different energy when I was out of sight. Doors opened and closed more freely. Voices carried just a little further. I stepped into the hallway quietly and paused near the top of the stairs. Jessica was on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice was lower than usual but clear enough. Yes, we are aiming for early next month, she said. She is still adjusting, but I do not think it will be a problem. A pause. Then a soft laugh. No, she does not suspect anything. I did not move. I did not breathe any louder than necessary. We just need to make sure the paperwork is finalized before we tell her, Jessica continued. Daniel will handle that part. Another pause. Yes, the house is in his name already. That part is secure. The house. My fingers tightened slightly against the railing. Not visibly. Not enough to make a sound. but enough for me to feel it. The house I had lived in for over 3 decades. The house I had maintained, paid for, protected. Secure. Already in his name. I stepped back slowly before she could turn around, retreating into my bedroom without a sound. I closed the door gently and stood there, letting the words settle. This was no longer about where I would live. This was about everything I owned. Everything I had built. Being transferred, managed, repositioned without my knowledge. I walked to my dresser and opened the second drawer. The one where I used to keep important documents. It was empty. Not messy. Not disturbed. Just empty. Cleaned out with intention. I closed it and moved to the closet again. This time reaching for the small lockbox on the top shelf. It was still there. For a moment I allowed myself a small measure of relief. I brought it down carefully and opened it. Inside were a few remaining papers. Not all of them. Just enough to give the illusion that nothing was missing. I flipped through them slowly, methodically. Insurance documents. Old receipts. A copy of my husband's will. But the updated property documents were gone. The ones we had signed together 10 years ago, after he insisted that everything be clearly protected. Gone. I sat down on the edge of the bed again, holding the lockbox in my lap. They had not just been planning. They had been acting. Quietly. Gradually. Piece by piece. And I had let it happen because I believed I was safe. Because I believed family meant something it clearly did not anymore. I closed the box and placed it back exactly where it had been. Then I stood up and walked to the mirror. The woman looking back at me did not look fragile. She did not look confused. Her posture was straight. Her eyes were clear. There was something else there now. Not anger. Not fear. Awareness. I adjusted the sleeve of my sweater and smoothed my hair back into place, taking a moment longer than necessary, not out of vanity but out of control. When I stepped out of that room again, I would not be the same person who had walked into it. Downstairs I could hear Jessica moving around, the faint sound of a drawer opening, the clink of a coffee mug being set down. Ordinary sounds. Predictable sounds. I walked down the stairs at a steady pace, each step measured, each movement intentional. When I entered the kitchen, she looked up and smiled immediately. "Good morning," she said, as if nothing had changed. I returned the smile just as easily. "Good morning," I replied. And in that moment, standing there across from her, I understood something with absolute clarity. They believed they were ahead of me. They believed they had already won. I let that belief settle comfortably between us. Because the truth was I had finally caught up. That afternoon I made my first move, and it was so small that no one noticed. I asked Daniel for a ride to the pharmacy. Not because I needed anything urgent, but because I needed to see how he would react when I asked for something simple, something reasonable. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before agreeing, and that hesitation told me more than his words ever could. Jessica offered to come along, of course. She always did. I smiled and declined. "It will just be a quick trip," I said gently. "You should stay and rest." She studied my face for a moment as if trying to read something beneath the surface, then nodded. "All right," she said. "Call me if you need anything." I assured her I would. I did not. The drive was quiet at first, just like the one from the hospital. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, but there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. "You feeling okay?" he asked after a few minutes. I nodded. "I am feeling better every day," I replied. Then I turned slightly in my seat to look at him. "You have been very busy lately." It was not a question. He shifted slightly, his grip tightening just enough to notice. "Work has been a lot," he said. "And just making sure everything is taken care of here." Taken care of. I let the words sit between us. "I appreciate that," I said calmly. "It is good to know everything is being handled." He nodded, relieved again, as if I had confirmed something he needed to believe. When we arrived at the pharmacy, I moved slowly, deliberately, allowing him to walk beside me instead of ahead of me. Inside, I picked up a few small items. Vitamins. A refill I did not urgently need. Enough to make the trip seem real. Then as we approached the counter, I paused. "I forgot something," I said lightly. "There is a place next door I need to stop by. It will only take a few minutes." Daniel frowned slightly. Do you want me to come with you? I shook my head. No, that is all right. You can wait here. I will not be long. He hesitated again. That hesitation was becoming familiar. Then he nodded. Okay. I will be right here. I smiled and turned toward the exit, stepping outside into the late afternoon light. The air was cooler than it had been in the morning, and for a moment, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Not because I needed the air, but because I needed the clarity. The office I walked into was not a store. It was a small legal office tucked between a dental clinic and a dry cleaner. The kind of place you would pass without noticing unless you were looking for it. I had not planned this before today, but once I understood what was happening, I knew exactly where I needed to go. The receptionist looked up as I entered. How can we help you? She asked. I returned her polite smile. I would like to speak with someone about reviewing some documents, I said. It will not take long. Within minutes, I was seated across from a man who introduced himself as Mr. Carter. He listened carefully as I spoke, not interrupting, not rushing me, just observing in that quiet, professional way that told me he understood more than I was saying. I did not tell him everything. I did not need to. I only asked the right questions. About property transfers. About legal authority. About what could be changed and what could be undone. When I finished, he leaned back slightly in his chair and folded his hands. You still have options, he said. Simple words. Powerful words. I nodded slowly, feeling something settle inside me. Something firm and unshakable. Good, I replied. That is all I needed to know. When I stepped back outside, the world looked exactly the same as it had 20 minutes earlier. The same cars passing by. The same people walking along the sidewalk. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. I returned to the pharmacy, where Daniel was waiting exactly where I had left him. He looked up as I approached. Everything okay? He asked. I smiled, calm, steady, completely in control. Yes, I said. Everything is exactly as it should be. And this time when I said it, I was not speaking about the present. I was speaking about what was coming next. The next 2 days I did nothing differently, and that was exactly what made it effective. I followed their rhythm. I accepted their suggestions. I moved slower when they watched me, spoke softer when they asked questions, and allowed small moments of silence to stretch just long enough for them to fill in the answers they wanted to hear. Jessica became more confident with each passing hour. I could see it in the way she moved through the house, no longer checking if I was watching, no longer adjusting her tone as carefully as before. She believed the transition had already begun. Daniel, on the other hand, remained quieter. There was something unsettled in him, something that surfaced in brief moments when he thought no one was looking. A hesitation before he spoke. A pause before he agreed with her. It was not enough to change anything, but it was enough to notice. And I noticed everything now. That evening, Jessica brought up the subject again, but this time with more certainty, more structure. We were sitting in the living room, the television on low volume, the soft glow of the screen casting shadows across the walls. I made a call earlier today, she said, her tone casual, as if she were discussing a routine appointment. There is a place not too far from here. Very highly rated. I thought it might be worth taking a look. I turned my head slightly, giving her my attention without urgency. That sounds reasonable, I replied. Daniel glanced at me, surprised by how easily I agreed. We do not have to decide anything right away, he added quickly. It is just an option. I nodded. Of course. Options are important. Jessica smiled, encouraged. They have an opening next month, she continued. If we want to secure it, we should probably visit soon. I let a small pause settle before responding. Not long enough to raise suspicion, just long enough to feel intentional. Then we should visit, I said. That was all it took. The shift in the room was immediate. Jessica's posture relaxed. Daniel leaned back slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. They believed I had accepted it. They believed I was cooperating. They believed the outcome was inevitable. I leaned back into the couch, folding my hands calmly in my lap, and let them talk through the details. Dates. Availability. Scheduling. Words that once would have made me feel included now sounded like they were being spoken about me, not with me. And I allowed it. Because every word they said gave me more clarity, More timing, more understanding of how far they had already gone. Later that night, after they had both gone upstairs, I remained in the living room a little longer. The house was quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not empty, not uncertain, just quiet. I stood up slowly and walked to the small desk in the corner, the one I used to keep bills and letters organized. The drawer opened smoothly, just as it always had. Inside were pens, envelopes, a few scattered papers. I took one of the pens and held it for a moment, feeling its weight in my hand. Control does not come from force. Comes from timing. From knowing when to move and when to remain still. I placed the pen back exactly where it had been and closed the drawer. Upstairs I could hear faint movement, a door closing, footsteps crossing the floor. Normal sounds. Predictable sounds. I turned off the light and made my way back to my room, each step steady, each breath measured. When I reached the doorway, I paused for just a moment, looking into the space that had once felt entirely secure. Then I stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind me. They believed I had agreed. They believed I was ready to follow their plan. And for now, that belief was the most valuable thing they had given me. Because it meant they would not see what was coming. It meant they would not prepare. It meant that when the moment arrived, it would not be theirs. It would be mine. The visit was scheduled for the following afternoon, and I agreed to it without hesitation. That alone seemed to surprise them. Jessica spent the morning preparing as if it were an important outing, choosing her clothes carefully, speaking with a lightness that felt almost rehearsed. Daniel checked the time more often than necessary, his movements slightly more rigid than usual. I remained calm, moving at a measured pace, giving them exactly what they expected to see. Compliance. That was the word they had already assigned to me. The drive to the facility was quiet, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This time it carried anticipation. Jessica spoke about the place as if she had already seen it, describing the gardens, the activities, the comfort. Daniel added small comments, agreeing with her, reinforcing the idea that this was a good decision, a logical next step. I listened. I nodded. I did not challenge anything they said. When we arrived, the building stood clean and polished, its exterior designed to look welcoming, its entrance framed with flowers that were just slightly too perfect. A woman greeted us at the door, her smile warm, her tone practiced. "You must be Margaret," she said. I returned her smile politely. "I am," I replied. She led us inside, her voice guiding us through hallways that smelled faintly of fresh linen and something else beneath it. Something harder to name. We walked past rooms with open doors, glimpses of lives reduced to small spaces. Chairs by windows. Photographs on dressers. People sitting quietly, some watching television, others simply looking out into nothing in particular. I did not look away. I took it all in. Jessica stayed close to me, her hand occasionally hovering near my elbow, ready to guide, to assist, to control. Daniel walked slightly ahead, asking questions, nodding at the answers, playing his role just as carefully. "This is one of our standard rooms," the woman said as she opened a door. Inside was a neatly arranged space. A bed. A chair. A small table. Everything in its place. Everything contained. I stepped inside slowly, letting my eyes move across the room, taking in every detail. "It is very nice," I said. And it was. In the way something can be both pleasant and limiting at the same time. The woman smiled. "We pride ourselves on creating a comfortable environment." Comfortable. That word again. Always that word. I turned slightly, looking back at Jessica and Daniel. Their expressions were hopeful, expectant, certain. They believed this moment was confirmation, that I would see what they wanted me to see, that I would accept what they had already decided. I gave them exactly what they needed. "I can see why you chose this place," I said calmly. Jessica's smile widened, relief softening her features. Daniel exhaled quietly, tension leaving his shoulders. The woman continued speaking, explaining schedules, services, routines. I listened to every word, not because I needed to learn them, but because I needed to understand the structure they had already built around me. After the tour, we sat down in a small office to discuss details. Papers were placed on the desk. Forms. Agreements. Timelines. The woman spoke gently, explaining each step, each requirement. Jessica leaned forward slightly, engaged, ready. Daniel glanced at me, waiting. I picked up one of the papers and looked at it, not rushing, not hesitating, just observing. Then I set it back down. I would like a little time to think, I said. My voice was calm, steady, reasonable. Jessica nodded quickly. Of course, she said. That makes sense. Daniel agreed just as easily. No rush, he added, though his tone suggested otherwise. We left the office and walked back through the hallway, past the same rooms, the same quiet lives contained within them. This time I noticed something else. Not just the stillness, not just the structure, but the finality. Once you entered a place like this, leaving was no longer part of the plan. When we stepped outside again, the air felt different. Lighter. Open. I paused for just a moment, letting that feeling settle. Then I turned to them and smiled, calm, composed, exactly as they expected. Thank you for bringing me here, I said. And I meant it. Because now I understood everything I needed to understand. And more importantly, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. 3 days later, I asked them to sit down with me in the living room, and this time I did not wait for them to guide the conversation. Jessica looked surprised at first, but she recovered quickly, taking her usual seat with that same composed posture. Daniel sat beside her, his hands resting on his knees, his expression uncertain in a way I had not seen before. I remained standing for a moment longer, not out of hesitation, but because it allowed me to control the space, the pace, the moment. Then I sat down across from them and folded my hands calmly in my lap. I have been thinking about the place you showed me. I began, my voice steady, measured, exactly as it had been every step of the way. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her eyes attentive. And? She asked gently. I met her gaze without shifting. You were right, I said. It is very well maintained. Very organized. Very final. The last word hung in the air just long enough to be felt, but not long enough to be questioned. Daniel shifted beside her, glancing at me, then away. Jessica smiled, though it did not reach her eyes. It is designed to provide stability, she said. I nodded once. Yes. Stability. I let a small pause settle before continuing. Which is why I made some decisions of my own. That was the moment everything changed. Not visibly. Not dramatically. Just a slight tightening in Jessica's shoulders. A subtle stillness in Daniel's posture. I reached into the folder beside me and placed a set of documents on the table between us. Neatly arranged. Aligned. Intentional. I met with someone a few days ago, I said calmly. Just to review my situation. To make sure everything was properly understood. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his brow furrowing. What do you mean? I looked at him, not unkindly, but without the softness he was used to. I mean that I wanted clarity, I said. And now I have it. Jessica did not speak. She was watching the papers. I could see the calculation behind her eyes, the quiet shift from confidence to uncertainty. The house, I continued, my tone even, has been transferred back into my name. Daniel blinked. What? The word came out softer than expected, more confused than defensive. That is not possible, Jessica said quickly, her voice still controlled but tighter now. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. It is, I replied. And it has already been processed. Silence followed. Not empty silence. Full silence. The kind that carries weight. I let it sit. Then I continued. I have also updated my will. That landed differently. Jessica's posture changed just slightly, but enough. Daniel's gaze dropped to the table. Everything I own, I said, will now go to a trust that cannot be altered without my direct approval. I paused, letting the meaning settle. And I have arranged for independent oversight. Jessica finally spoke. Margaret, we were only trying to help you, she said, her tone carefully balanced between concern and defense. I looked at her, really looked at her, without anger, without accusation, just clarity. No, I said quietly. You were trying to manage me. Daniel inhaled slowly, his hands tightening together. Mom, we just thought. I know what you thought. I interrupted gently, not sharply, just enough to stop him. And that is exactly why I needed to think for myself. I reached forward and slid the documents slightly closer to them. You will not need to worry about finding me a place to stay, I added. I have already made arrangements. Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly. What arrangements? She asked. I allowed a small calm smile. The kind where I choose where I go, I said. Another pause. Then I stood up slowly, steady, composed, entirely in control of the moment that had once belonged to them. I will be leaving at the end of the week, I said. Everything you need to know is in those papers. Daniel looked up at me, something unspoken in his eyes, something too late to matter. Jessica said nothing. For the first time since I had returned home, she had nothing to say. I turned and walked toward the hallway, my steps quiet, deliberate, unhurried. I did not look back. I did not need to, because the truth was simple. They had made their plan. They had prepared every detail. They had believed they were in control. But in the end, control does not belong to the one who moves first. It belongs to the one who understands when to move at all. And now finally, that was me. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new stories.